"I speak 9 languages," the 12-year-old girl said, looking directly into the eyes of Augustus Smith. The millionaire burst into a cruel laughter in front of all his executives. Amanda, the daughter of the cleaning lady, did not look down. What came out of her lips next left him in shock. Augustus adjusted his $150,000 watch as he looked with absolute disdain at the meeting room on the 27th floor of his corporate tower in the heart of the city. At 48 years old, he had built a tech empire that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the country, with a personal fortune of $2.8 billion, but also one of the most arrogant. His office was an obscene monument to his oversized ego. The walls were made of imported black marble, and the art pieces cost more than entire mansions. A 180-o panoramic view constantly reminded him that he was literally above all the mortals who crawled through the streets like insignificant ants. But what Augustus enjoyed the most was not his astronomical wealth. It was the cruel power that this wealth gave him to humiliate and destroy those he considered inferior. "Mr. Smith," the trembling voice of his secretary interrupted his thoughts of superiority through the golden intercom. "Mrs. Rose and her daughter have arrived for the cleaning. Let them in," he answered with a cruel smile that slowly spread across his tanned face. "Today, I will have a little fun." For the past week, Augustus had been meticulously planning his favorite game of public humiliation. He had received, as part of a family inheritance, an ancient document written in multiple languages that the city's best translators had declared impossible to fully decipher. It was a mysterious text, with characters that mixed Mandarin, Arabic, Sanskrit, and other languages that not even university experts could identify. But Augustus had turned this into his cruelest personal entertainment. At that moment, the glass door opened silently. Rose, 42, entered in her impeccable navy blue uniform, pushing her cleaning cart, which had been her faithful companion for the last 6 years of working in this building. Behind her, with hesitant steps and a worn but clean school backpack, came her daughter Amanda. Amanda, 12, was the perfect antithesis of the world of obscene luxury that surrounded her. Her black shoes, though carefully polished, had seen better days. Her public school uniform was mended but spotless, and her books from the municipal library stuck out of a backpack that had clearly been passed down from several older siblings. Her eyes, large and curious, contrasted dramatically with the submissive and fearful look her mother had developed after years of being treated as invisible. "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith," Rose murmured, with her head down, exactly as she had learned he expected. "I didn't know you had a meeting. My daughter is with me today because I have no one to leave her with. We can come back later if you prefer." "No, no, no," Augustus stopped her, with a laugh that sounded like a predator's bark. "Stay. This is going to be absolutely hilarious." He stood behind his black marble desk, his eyes gleaming with the cruelty of someone who had found new prey to torture. He walked around them like a circling shark, enjoying the obvious terror in Rose's eyes and the confusion in little Amanda's. "Rose, tell your daughter what her mommy does here every day," he ordered with a venomous smile. "Amanda already knows, sir. I clean the offices," Rose answered in a low voice, her hands gripping the cart handle until her knuckles turned white. "Exactly. You clean," Augustus applauded sarcastically, his voice filled with contempt. "And tell me, what's your education level, Rose?" Rose felt the heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks. "Sir, I finished high school." "High school? Just high school?" Augustus burst into a cruel laugh that echoed throughout the office. "And here you have your little daughter, who probably inherited the same mediocre genes." Amanda felt something strange stirring in her chest. For years, she had seen how other children in her class lived in big houses, had new clothes, and their parents picked them up in luxury cars. She had accepted that her family was different, that they had less, but she had never seen anyone humiliate her mother in such a direct and cruel way. In fact, Augustus had an idea that seemed absolutely hilarious to him. "Amanda, come here. I want to show you something." Amanda looked at her mother, who nervously nodded and approached the desk with small but determined steps. Despite her youth, there was something in her eyes that Augustus had never seen in Rose's, a spark of defiance that had not been completely crushed by poverty and circumstances. "Look at this document." Augustus placed the ancient papers in front of her eyes, as if they were a dirty rag. "The 5 most intelligent translators in the city can't read this. They are university doctors, professors with international degrees, language experts who have studied for decades." Amanda looked at the papers with genuine curiosity. Her eyes moved over the strange characters, the words in languages that seemed to dance between different writing systems. "Do you know what this means?" Augustus asked with a mocking smile that spread across his entire face. It was a rhetorical question, a cruel joke designed to demonstrate this poor girl's obvious inferiority to the educated academics. To his surprise, Amanda did not immediately look away. Instead, she studied the document with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "No, sir," she finally replied in a low voice. "Of course not!" Augustus roared with laughter, slapping the table with both hands. "A 12-year-old girl from a cleaning lady's family, when doctors with 30 years of experience can't either?" he said, turning to Rose, his voice becoming even more venomous. "Do you get the irony, Rose? You clean the bathrooms of men who are infinitely smarter than you, and your daughter will end up doing the exact same thing because intelligence is inherited." Rose gritted her teeth, trying to hold back the tears of humiliation that threatened to spill. For 6 years she had endured comments like these. She had developed an emotional armor to protect herself from the cruelty of men like Augustus. But seeing her daughter humiliated this way was different. It was a pain that cut deeper than any personal insult. Amanda watched the entire scene with an expression that was gradually changing. The initial confusion was being replaced by something more powerful: indignation, not for herself, but for her mother, who worked 14 hours a day to support her 3 children, who never complained, who always found a way to put food on the table and school supplies in their backpacks. "Enough games." Augustus returned to his seat, clearly enjoying every second of his spectacle of cruelty. "Rose, you can start cleaning. And Amanda, sit there quietly while the important adults work." "Excuse me, sir." Amanda's clear, firm voice cut through the air like a sharp knife. Augustus turned around, surprised that the girl dared to interrupt. His expression was a mixture of amusement and irritation. "What do you want, little girl? Are you going to defend your mommy?" Amanda walked slowly across the office, her steps echoing on the marble with a determination that surprised everyone in the room. When she reached Augustus, she looked directly into the eyes of the adult who was trying to intimidate her. "Sir," she said with a calmness that contrasted dramatically with her age, "you said the best translators in the city can't read this document." Augustus blinked, confused by the confidence in this child's voice, who should have been trembling with fear. "That's right, so what? And can you read it?" The question hit Augustus like an unexpected slap. Throughout his life, he had used his wealth and position to intimidate others, but he had never claimed to have specific academic knowledge. His fortune came from smart investments and cruel business decisions, not higher education. That's beside the point," Augustus stammered, feeling for the first time in years that he was losing control of a conversation. "I'm not a translator." "So you can't read it either," Amanda stated with simple but devastating logic. "Does that make you less intelligent than the doctors, who also can't?" Rose gasped. In 12 years of life, she had never seen her daughter defy an adult this way, and she had certainly never seen anyone, child or adult, put Augustus Smith in such an uncomfortable position with a simple question. Augustus felt his face redden, a mixture of anger and something he hadn't experienced in decades: shame. This 12-year-old girl had just exposed the fundamental hypocrisy in his logic with the brutal clarity of innocence. "That's completely different," he roared, his voice increasing in volume to compensate for the weakness of his argument. "I'm a successful businessman. I'm worth almost $3 billion. But does that make you smarter?" Amanda asked with the same unshakable calm. "My teacher says that intelligence is not measured by the money you have, but by what you know and how you treat others." The silence that followed was so deep that you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Augustus found himself completely disarmed by the simple yet impeccable logic of a 12-year-old girl who had just destroyed his central argument with a surgeon's precision. Rose looked at her daughter with a mixture of terror and pride. Terror because she knew that Augustus Smith had the power to destroy their lives with a single phone call. Pride because for the first time she was seeing her daughter defend herself and by extension defend her family's dignity. "Besides," Amanda continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "you said I couldn't read the document because I'm a cleaning lady's daughter, but you never asked me what languages I speak." Augustus felt a strange shiver run down his spine. There was something in the way Amanda had spoken those last words that gave him a bad feeling. "What languages do you speak?" he asked, though he was no longer sure he wanted to hear the answer. Amanda looked directly into his eyes with a confidence that seemed impossible in someone so young. "I speak native Portuguese, advanced English, fluent Spanish, intermediate French, basic Italian, conversational German, basic Mandarin, conversational Arabic, and beginner Russian." The list came from her lips like a powerful sequence, each language pronounced with a precision that made Augustus's jaw slowly drop. "That's 9 languages," Amanda added with a small but triumphant smile. "How many do you speak?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Rose was paralyzed, not just by the shock of hearing her daughter list languages she didn't even know she knew, but by the realization that the power dynamic in the room had just completely shifted. Augustus opened and closed his mouth several times like a fish out of water. For 48 years, he had used his wealth as a shield and a sword, intimidating others with his financial success. He had never found himself in a situation where a 12-year-old girl had intellectually outsmarted him in public. That's," he stammered, all his arrogance evaporating. "Would you like me to try to read your document?" Amanda asked with a courtesy that somehow made the offer even more devastating. "Maybe I can help where the doctors couldn't." And at that moment, Augustus Smith realized he had made the gravest mistake of his life. He had completely underestimated the wrong person and was about to discover that some humiliations couldn't be bought out of. Little Amanda was about to change his world forever. The silence that followed Amanda's question was so dense it seemed to have physical weight. Augustus Smith, the most powerful man in the city, found himself completely paralyzed by a 12-year-old girl who had just shattered his logic with the brutal simplicity of truth. His hands trembled slightly as he processed what he had just heard. 9 languages. A girl who was supposedly grateful for the crumbs of public education had declared that she spoke 9 languages, more than he could learn in his entire life, even with all his billions. That's impossible," Augustus finally stammered, his voice sounding strangely weak in the room he had specifically designed to intimidate. Where did you learn all that?" Amanda looked at him with an expression that was a mixture of patience and determination, as if she were explaining something obvious to an adult who hadn't been paying attention. "At the municipal library, Mr. Smith," she said. "They have free language programs every day after school. There are also videos on the internet, free apps, and books that anyone can borrow if they're curious to learn." Each word was like a gentle but devastating slap. Augustus realized that while he had been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on art nobody saw, on exclusive restaurants where he flaunted his wealth, and on watches that cost more than Rose's annual salary, this girl had been quietly building a knowledge he could never buy. Rose looked at her daughter with a mixture of awe and terror. She had known that Amanda was smart, that she always brought home good grades, that she spent hours at the library, but she had never imagined the true extent of what her daughter had been silently learning. The programs are run by immigrants who live in the city, Amanda continued with the same unbreakable calm. Mrs. Wang teaches me Mandarin on Tuesdays. Ahmed helps me with Arabic on Thursdays. Maria teaches me Italian on Saturdays. They are people who, like my mother, have simple jobs but know incredible things. Augustus felt sick. This girl had just described a network of learning he had never known existed, a community of people he had automatically dismissed as inferior, but who apparently possessed knowledge that rivaled that of university professors. But that doesn't mean you can read a complex academic document, Augustus said, desperately clinging to any fragment of superiority he could maintain. Speaking basic languages is not the same as understanding specialized ancient texts. You're right, Amanda nodded, surprising him. That's why I also study at the classical languages session at the Central University Library on weekends. The librarians let me in because I always return books on time and never make noise. Augustus's jaw completely dropped. The Federal University Library. On Saturday mornings it's almost empty, she explained. I've been reading about comparative linguistics, ancient writing systems, and the evolution of languages for the last 2 years. It's fascinating how languages connect with each other through history. Augustus collapsed into his chair as if someone had taken all the bones out of his body. This 12-year-old girl had not only been learning modern languages, but had been independently studying subjects that normally required postgraduate degrees to fully understand. 2 years, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I started when I was 10, she said. My mother was working double shifts to pay for a private school for us, but then she lost that extra job. When I went back to public school, I had a lot of free time because the classes were easier, so I decided to use that time to learn things that really interested me. Each word was like a hammer blow directly to Augustus's ego. He realized that while he was bragging about the higher education his money could buy, this girl was getting an education that was infinitely more impressive through pure intellectual curiosity and determination. Show me, Augustus said suddenly, his voice raspy. If you really know all that, show me. Amanda looked at her mother, who nervously nodded and approached the table where the mysterious document that had defeated the 5 most prestigious translators in the city was. She took the papers with firm hands and studied them for a moment that felt like an eternity. Augustus could see her eyes moving over the strange characters, recognizing patterns, making connections that the university experts had missed. It's interesting, Amanda murmured, more to herself than to others. It's not a single language. It's a combination of several writing systems organized in thematic layers. Augustus felt as if the whole world was turning upside down. What? What does that mean? The document is structured like a linguistic puzzle, she explained. Each paragraph is written in a different language, but all the paragraphs speak of the same theme from different cultural perspectives. It's as if someone wanted to preserve the same wisdom in multiple linguistic traditions. Rose slowly approached, fascinated despite her terror. She had never seen her daughter speak with such academic authority. She had never witnessed the true scope of her intelligence. Can you read it? Rose asked in a whisper. Amanda looked up from the document and looked directly at Augustus. Would you like me to try, Mr. Smith? Augustus felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff. Part of him wanted to say no. He wanted to maintain the illusion that this girl was just that, a child who had gotten lucky with some memorized phrases, But another part of him, a part that had been buried under decades of arrogance, was genuinely curious to know what this extraordinary creature would say. "Yes," he murmured, "try." Amanda returned her attention to the document and began to read. But what came out of her mouth made Augustus completely paralyzed, because Amanda, the 12-year-old daughter of a cleaning lady, began to read the first paragraph in perfect classical Mandarin. Her pronunciation was impeccable, with tones that indicated not only knowledge of the language, but a deep understanding of its cultural nuances. The words flowed from her lips like ancient music, laden with meaning and authority that seemed impossible in someone so young. Augustus was left with his mouth agape, his expression of mockery turning into one of absolute shock that he would never forget. For 48 years, he had operated under the belief that real education, true intelligence, was only available to those who could pay for it. This girl had just completely shattered that belief, but Amanda didn't stop. When she finished the first paragraph in Mandarin, without even pausing, she moved on to the second paragraph and began to read in classical Arabic with the same supernatural fluency. The words came out of her mouth with a musicality that made Augustus feel as if he were witnessing something impossible. This wasn't a girl reciting memorized phrases. This was a genuine academic who understood not only the words, but the cultural and historical contexts behind each expression. Rose put her hands to her heart, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Her daughter, her little Amanda, who helped her do the dishes after dinner and did her homework at the kitchen table under a dim lamp, was demonstrating a level of knowledge that rivaled that of university professors. Amanda continued with the third paragraph, this time speaking in what sounded like ancient Italian. Augustus had no idea what she was saying, but he could hear the reverence in her voice, as if she understood not only the words, but the spiritual and philosophical weight they carried. With each language Amanda perfectly mastered, Augustus's humiliation grew exponentially. He realized that for decades he had been bragging about his superior education to employees like Rose, when in reality, Rose's daughter knew more about almost any academic subject than he ever would. His world of certainties was collapsing word by word, language by language. Amanda read the fourth paragraph in what sounded like Russian, her voice acquiring a different quality that indicated deep respect for the tradition she was representing. Then, the fifth paragraph in classical German, followed by the sixth in French. When she finally finished reading, Amanda looked up from the document and looked directly at Augustus. For the first time in the history of his interactions with service employees, there was no submission in the eyes that looked at him. There was something he had never seen directed at him, a deep, ancient, wise intelligence that had been hidden all this time behind economic poverty and youth. "Would you like me to translate the full meaning, Mr. Smith?" Amanda asked with a calmness that contrasted dramatically with the trembling that had invaded everyone present. Augustus tried to speak, but only a muffled sound came from his throat. His face had gone from the red of anger to the white of absolute shock. His hands were trembling, and he could feel cold sweat running down his back despite the air conditioning in the room. Rose approached her daughter with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Amanda, how? Where did you learn all that?" Amanda smiled for the first time since this whole situation had started, but it was a smile that had a wisdom that seemed impossible in someone her age. "Mom," she answered, with a voice that suddenly had a dignity that Augustus had never heard before in his room. "You always told me that education was the only thing no one could ever take away from me. So I decided to get all the education I could find. It didn't matter if I had to get it at public libraries." These words were like a dagger directly to Augustus's heart. He realized that this girl had achieved more with free resources and personal determination than he had achieved with millions of dollars and elite connections. Augustus finally found his voice, although it sounded strangled and weak. "What? What does the document say?" Amanda placed the document on the marble desk with reverential care, as if it were a precious treasure. Her movements were suddenly different. She no longer had the hunched posture of a girl trying to be invisible, but the upright posture of someone who knew her own intellectual worth. "The document talks about the true nature of wisdom and wealth," Amanda began. Her voice was clear and firm. "It says that true wisdom does not dwell in golden palaces, but in humble hearts. That real wealth is not counted in coins, but in the ability to see the dignity in every soul." Each word was like an arrow aimed directly at Augustus's soul. He realized that the document was not just a linguistic puzzle, it was a mirror that reflected exactly what he had become and what he had lost in the process. It says that he who believes himself superior because of his possessions is the poorest of all men, because he has lost the ability to recognize the light in others. Amanda continued, looking directly at Augustus as she spoke. "And what else?" Augustus whispered, although a part of him no longer wanted to hear the answer. "That true power does not come from the ability to humiliate others, but from the ability to elevate them. And that when a powerful man discovers that he has been blind to the wisdom that surrounded him, that is the moment of his true awakening, or his eternal condemnation." The room fell into absolute silence when Amanda finished. Augustus realized that he had not only been humiliated by a 12-year-old girl, he had been judged by her and found wanting in all the aspects that truly mattered. He had come face to face with his own soul, and he didn't like what he saw at all. The silence that followed Amanda's words was so profound that Augustus could hear the beating of his own heart, echoing like war drums in his ears. For the first time in 48 years of his life, he was completely speechless, defenseless, without the armor of arrogance he had carefully built for decades. His hands trembled as he clung to the edge of his marble desk, trying to find something solid in a world that had suddenly become liquid and unstable. The girl who had been standing in front of him was no longer simply the daughter of a cleaning lady. She was a brutal mirror that reflected everything he had lost, everything he had never been, and everything he could never buy with his $2.8 billion. Who are you, really?" Augustus whispered, his voice barely audible in the room he had designed to intimidate, but which now felt like a prison of his own making. Amanda looked at him with an expression that was a mixture of compassion and a wisdom that seemed impossible in someone 12 years old. "I am exactly who you have always seen, Mr. Smith," she said. "I am Amanda, daughter of Rose, a student at the public school, and someone who believes that all people deserve to be treated with dignity." Each word was like a drop of acid falling on Augustus's soul. He realized that all his life he had been confusing external labels with the real worth of people. He had judged Rose by her cleaning uniform, without ever wondering what kind of mother could raise such an extraordinary daughter. He had assumed that economic poverty was equal to intellectual poverty, when the evidence to the contrary had been in front of him for years. Rose approached her daughter and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Amanda, it's time to go," she murmured softly, clearly worried about the possible consequences of what had just happened. "No," Augustus said suddenly, his voice raspy with emotion. "Please, don't go." Mother and daughter looked at him in surprise. For 6 years, Augustus had never asked Rose for anything as a favor. He had never shown the slightest consideration for her schedules, her needs, or her basic humanity. I need to understand," Augustus continued, struggling with words he had never uttered before. "How is it possible? How can a 12-year-old girl know more than me about everything?" Amanda exchanged a look with her mother, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod, and she approached the chair in front of Augustus's desk. For the first time in the history of that room, someone who was not a millionaire sat as an equal in front of the empire's owner. "I don't know more than you about everything, Mr. Smith," Amanda replied with brutal honesty. "You know about business, about making money, about running companies. Those are skills I don't have." But she continued, and Augustus could feel a devastating punch coming. "You never learned about the things that really matter. You never learned about respect, about humility, about seeing the humanity in others. And those are the most important lessons of all." Augustus felt as if each word were a direct punch to the stomach. "And you did learn them?" he asked, his voice coming out lower than usual. "My mother taught me," Amanda answered, simply looking at Rose with genuine love. "She works 14 hours a day to give my brothers and me a decent life. She never complains. She never speaks ill of the people who treat her unfairly. She always finds time to help me with my homework, even when she's exhausted." Rose felt tears welling up in her eyes as she heard her daughter describe her sacrifices with such clarity and appreciation. "Do you know what my mother taught me that is worth more than all your millions?" Amanda asked, looking directly at Augustus. Augustus shook his head, unable to speak. "She taught me that true wealth is in the ability to make others feel valuable. She taught me that intelligence without kindness is simply educated cruelty. And she taught me that no matter how little you have materially, you can always choose to treat others with dignity." Each lesson was like a gentle but devastating slap. Augustus realized that Rose, whom he had treated as if she were invisible for 6 years, had been raising a philosopher in her humble home while he had been accumulating expensive objects in his empty mansion. "But I worked my whole life to get where I am," Augustus protested weakly, clinging to the last shreds of his self-image. "You built an empire from scratch, and that's admirable," Amanda agreed, surprising him with her frankness. "But the question is, what did you build it for? To help others? To make the world a better place? Or just to feel superior to people like my mother?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Augustus opened his mouth to defend himself, but he realized he had no answer that wouldn't make him sound like the selfish monster he probably was. "I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice breaking with the most honest admission he had made in decades. "That's the difference between us, Mr. Smith," Amanda said softly. "You never asked yourself why you were building your empire. I always ask myself why I'm learning each new language, reading each new book, studying each new subject. And what's your answer? Because I want to understand the world well enough to help change it. Because I believe that education is a tool for justice, not for arrogance. And because I want to honor the sacrifices my mother made by giving a purpose to everything I've learned." Augustus felt something strange moving in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. It was a mixture of deep shame and something that could be admiration, respect. He wasn't sure, but he knew it was the first time in decades he felt he was in the presence of someone genuinely superior to him. Not in money or power, but in the things that really mattered. "What do I do now?" he asked, and was surprised by the genuine vulnerability in his own voice. Amanda studied him for a long moment, as if she were evaluating whether the question was sincere or just another manipulation. Apparently, she decided it was genuine. "First," she said, "you need to apologize to my mother, not just for today, but for 6 years of treating her as if she were invisible." Augustus looked at Rose, who had been watching the entire conversation with a mixture of terror and fascination. For 6 years, she had been simply the cleaning lady to him. He had never known her full name, never asked about her family, never even acknowledged her basic humanity. "Rose," his voice trembled, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all these years of treating you as if you weren't a real person. I'm sorry for never asking about your life, for never recognizing that you have a family, dreams, hopes, and I'm especially sorry for humiliating you in front of your daughter today." Rose was speechless. In 6 years of work, Augustus had never said her name, let alone apologized for anything. "But an apology is not enough," Amanda continued relentlessly. "Words are easy. Real change requires actions. What kind of actions? You need to change how you treat all your employees. You need to learn their names, understand their lives, recognize their humanity. You need to use your wealth to elevate others instead of humiliating them. But I don't know how to do that, Augustus admitted, feeling like a lost child. Then learn, Amanda replied with the same determination she had used to learn 9 languages. My mother can teach you. She knows more about real leadership than all the business books you've read. Augustus looked at Rose with new eyes. For the first time in 6 years, he really saw her. He saw a woman who had raised an extraordinary daughter while working exhausting jobs. He saw someone who had maintained her dignity despite years of humiliation. He saw a real leader who had been under his nose all this time. Rose, he said softly, would you help me? Would you teach me how to be better? Rose looked at him for a long moment, evaluating whether this transformation was genuine or temporary. Finally, she said slowly, but there are conditions. Amanda intervened. Whatever you want, Augustus replied immediately. First, my mother needs a real job with a decent salary and respect. No more cleaning bathrooms for a man who can afford 100 employees. Agreed. Second, you will create a scholarship program for children like me, intelligent children from working-class families who deserve real opportunities. Agreed. Third, you will learn at least 1 new language to understand what it feels like to be in a student's shoes again. Augustus blinked, surprised by that condition. What language? Amanda smiled for the first time since this whole situation had started. I'll teach you Mandarin on Tuesdays after work at the municipal library. The idea of Augustus Smith, one of the wealthiest men in the city, learning languages at a public library was so revolutionary it almost seemed impossible. But as he looked at this extraordinary girl and her resilient mother, he realized that maybe it was exactly the kind of impossible he needed in his life. Do we have a deal? Amanda asked, extending her small but firm hand. Augustus looked at the girl's hand for a moment, knowing that shaking it would fundamentally change who he was as a person. Then, for the first time in decades, he made a decision based not on money or power, but on the hope of becoming someone worthy of respect. He shook Amanda's hand firmly. We have a deal, he said, and for the first time in years, I feel like I've done something truly important. The change had begun. The man who had entered that room as an arrogant tyrant was leaving as someone willing to learn, and all because a 12-year-old girl had the courage to show him that true education is not bought, it is earned. That true wealth is not accumulated, it is shared, and that true greatness is not imposed, it is inspired. 3 days after the meeting that had changed everything, Augustus Smith found himself doing something he had never imagined in his entire life, nervously waiting in the lobby of the municipal public library. It was a building he had passed for decades without even noticing it. His hands were sweating as he held a basic college notebook he had bought at a neighborhood stationery store, feeling like a first-day student waiting to meet his most intimidating teacher. The contrast could not have been more dramatic. For 48 years, Augustus had operated from crystal towers, marble offices, and meeting rooms where every object cost more than the average family's annual salary. Now he was standing in a public space, surrounded by children doing homework, seniors reading newspapers, and mothers carrying babies while looking for books. It was a completely different world from his, a world that existed parallel to his bubble of privilege, without him ever having noticed it. Mr. Smith, a familiar voice took him out of his anxious reflections. He turned to see Amanda walking toward him with a school backpack full of books and a smile that was professional, but warm. She was no longer wearing the worn school uniform she had worn during their first meeting, but casual weekend clothes that, although clearly not expensive, were spotless and carefully coordinated. Amanda, Augustus replied, surprised by how natural it sounded to say her name with genuine respect. Thank you for... for doing this. "Are you ready for your first class?" Amanda asked, gesturing to the study tables that were full of students of all ages. "Honestly, I'm terrified," Augustus admitted, a confession that would have been unthinkable a week before. "I haven't been a student since college, and that was 30 years ago." Amanda guided him to the languages section, an area Augustus had never known existed. The walls were covered with posters of alphabets in different languages, world maps marking language families, and schedules of free classes in dozens of different languages. "All this is free?" Augustus asked with genuine incredulity. "Completely free," Amanda replied as she organized basic Mandarin materials on the table. "The city believes that education should be accessible to everyone, not just for those who can afford it." The statement hit Augustus like a gentle slap. For decades, he had assumed that quality education was a privilege that was bought, when apparently it had been available a few blocks from his office all this time. "Let's start with the basics," Amanda announced, opening a worn but well-cared-for textbook. "The 4 Mandarin tones are fundamental. Without them, a word can mean completely different things." For the next hour, Augustus experienced something he hadn't felt in decades: the absolute humility of being completely ignorant on a subject. Amanda was a patient but demanding teacher, correcting his pronunciation with the same academic authority she had demonstrated when translating the mysterious document. "Ma, ma, ma." Augustus tried to repeat the tones, his voice sounding awkward and raspy compared to Amanda's. Musical fluency. "Better," Amanda encouraged him after his 10th attempt. "Remember, the first tone is high and flat, as if you were singing a sustained note." Augustus realized he was sweating from the mental effort of something this 12-year-old girl mastered with apparent ease. It was a deeper lesson in humility than any financial loss he had ever experienced. "Can I ask you something?" Augustus said during a pause. "Of course. How can you teach with so much patience someone who treated you so badly?" Amanda considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I believe in second chances, and because teaching is a way of honoring all the teachers who were patient with me." "But aren't you angry? Don't you feel resentment?" "I was angry," Amanda admitted honestly, "very angry. But my mother taught me that anger is like holding a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. In the end, you're the only one who gets burned." The wisdom of those words, coming from someone who could have been his granddaughter, hit Augustus deeply. He realized that he had been holding burning coals of arrogance and contempt for decades, burning himself without realizing it. "Let's continue," he said, determined to honor his young teacher's patience with genuine effort. As he progressed awkwardly through basic Mandarin characters, Augustus became aware of his surroundings. At the table next to him, an elderly woman helped a child with math. At another, a group of teenagers studied in silence for exams. In the computer section, adults learned basic digital skills. It was a microcosm of learning and growth that had existed parallel to his world of luxury without him ever noticing it. He realized that he had been living in a bubble so dense that he had completely lost sight of the humanity that surrounded him. "Amanda," he said softly, "can I meet some of your other teachers?" Amanda's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd like to?" "I would love to," he said. Amanda guided him through the library, introducing him to an extraordinary community of volunteer educators who had been operating under his nose for years. He met Ahmed, a Syrian refugee who taught Arabic while working as a taxi driver. Mrs. Wang, a retiree who had been a professor in Beijing before emigrating. Maria, a domestic worker who taught Italian on weekends. Each introduction was like a gentle punch to his previous worldview. These people whom he would have automatically looked down on as service workers were revealed to be brilliant educators with extraordinary stories of resilience and knowledge. Dr. Ahmed, Augustus said, using the title Amanda told him was appropriate. Amanda tells me you teach classical Arabic. Ahmed smiled warmly. It's an honor to keep the language alive, he said. In my country, I was a university professor of literature. Here, I drive a taxi, but the languages live in the heart. Augustus felt a pang of shame as he remembered how many times he had taken taxis driven by men like Ahmed, without ever asking about their previous lives, their losses, their silent contributions to the community. Could you teach me a little Arabic too? He asked timidly. It would be an honor, Ahmed replied, and Augustus could see tears forming in his eyes. It's been a long time since someone asked me to teach for the simple love of knowledge. When he finally finished his first Mandarin class, Augustus felt physically and mentally exhausted, but also strangely energized. For decades, he had assumed he was done learning, that his education was complete. Discovering that he could still struggle with new concepts, still feel the satisfaction of mastering something difficult, was an unexpected revelation. Same time next week? Amanda asked as she packed up her materials. Absolutely, Augustus replied without hesitation. And Amanda, thank you, not just for the language class, but for showing me a world I was ignoring. You weren't ignoring it, Amanda corrected gently. You just didn't know it existed. Now that you know, you can choose what to do with that knowledge. As Augustus drove back to his mansion that night, his thoughts were completely occupied by the day's lessons. Not just the Mandarin lessons, but the deeper lessons about community, humility, and the wealth of knowledge that existed in places he had never thought to look. The next day, Augustus did something that surprised his entire executive team. He called an emergency meeting, not to discuss profits or expansion, but to talk about corporate social responsibility. I want us to establish a full scholarship program for students from working-class families, he announced to his surprised executives. And I want us to sponsor language programs in public libraries throughout the city. What's the return on investment? His financial director asked with obvious confusion. The return is that we live in a better society, Augustus replied, surprised by the conviction in his voice. The return is that we stop wasting human talent due to accident of birth. His executives exchanged worried glances, clearly thinking their boss had lost his mind. But Augustus no longer cared what the men who had been accomplices in his previous arrogance thought. That same week, he fulfilled another of his promises. Rose was officially hired as the Director of Human Development with a salary that was 10 times what she had been earning as a cleaning lady. Her first task would be to work with Augustus to identify and develop hidden talent among all the company's employees. Rose, Augustus told her during their first official meeting, I want you to teach me everything Amanda says you know about real leadership. Rose, still adjusting to her new office and new status, looked at him with a mixture of determination and nervousness. Mr. Smith, real leadership is not having power over others. It is having the power to elevate others. Teach me, Augustus said, simply. And so began an education that was worth more than all the university degrees and business master's degrees that money could buy. An education about humanity, humility, and the responsibility that comes with real privilege. For the first time in decades, Augustus Smith was learning the lessons that really mattered and discovering that true growth did not come from accumulating more, but from becoming more. Not from having more power, but from using the power you have to elevate others. 6 weeks after the meeting that had changed everything, Augustus Smith found himself facing something he had not anticipated, a silent but determined rebellion from his closest social circle. The exclusive business club, where he had had lunch every Friday for the last 15 years, had suddenly become hostile territory. Augustus, we need to talk, declared Fernando, an oil magnate and one of his oldest golf partners, as he sat heavily in front of him in the club's private lounge. His eyes had the hardness of someone who had come to stage an intervention. Of course, Fernando. What do you want to talk about? Augustus replied, although he could perfectly sense where the conversation was heading. About your recent, strange behavior, Fernando began, gesturing with his $2,000 glass of wine. The whole city is talking. They say you're learning languages in public libraries, that you promoted a cleaning lady to an executive position, that you're spending millions on scholarships for poor children. Is all this true? It's true, Augustus confirmed calmly, continuing with his lunch as if they were discussing the weather. You've gone crazy, interjected Sebastian, heir to a pharmaceutical empire, his voice filled with incredulity. A cleaning lady as an executive, you learning in public libraries with common people? Augustus felt a familiar pang of irritation, but this time it was not directed at those who were challenging him, but at his own past attitudes reflected in his former friends. Rose is more intelligent and has better leadership skills than most of the executives I've met, Augustus replied calmly. And yes, I am learning Mandarin and Arabic from extraordinary teachers who happen to work as taxi drivers and domestic workers. Extraordinary teachers who work as taxi drivers? Fernando laughed with cruelty. Augustus, you've completely lost touch with reality. Those people aren't real teachers. They're failures who couldn't keep jobs in their own countries. The statement hit Augustus like a slap. It was exactly the kind of comment he would have made 6 weeks earlier, and now it seemed to him not only ignorant, but cruelly inhuman. Fernando, Dr. Ahmed held a chair in Arabic literature at a university before the war destroyed his country, Augustus replied, his voice acquiring a tone his friends had rarely heard. Mrs. Wang was director of the Department of Linguistics in Beijing before emigrating to join her family. They are not failures. They are brilliant refugees and immigrants who are rebuilding their lives. And since when do you care about that? Sebastian asked with evident contempt. For years you mocked those same people. What changed? Augustus considered the question carefully. What had really changed? Was it just the shock of being humiliated by Amanda, or had it been something deeper? I realized I was living in a bubble so dense that I had completely lost sight of what it means to be human, Augustus answered honestly. I realized I had confused financial success with moral superiority, and that I was wasting opportunities to meet extraordinary people because of stupid prejudices. That's ridiculous, interrupted Ricardo, a telecommunications magnate who had arrived late to the conversation but had heard enough to catch up. Augustus, we all know you're going through some kind of crisis. Maybe you should consider taking a vacation, seeing a psychiatrist. I'm not having a crisis, Augustus interrupted firmly. For the first time in decades, I am completely sane. You are the ones living in a fantasy where money makes you better people. The silence that followed was tense and hostile. Augustus could see that he had crossed a line with his old friends, who had come expecting him to admit his mistake and return to the flock of shared arrogance. Look, Augustus, Fernando leaned forward, his voice becoming threatening. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's affecting all of us. The other businessmen are starting to question our circle. They're wondering if we've all gone soft. And does that worry you? Augustus asked with genuine curiosity. Of course it worries me, Fernando replied. Our power comes from sticking together, from presenting a unified front. When one of us starts acting like a social activist, it weakens everyone. Augustus realized something fundamental at that moment. His old friends were not worried about his mental well-being or his business success. They were worried because his transformation threatened the system of privilege from which they all benefited. Do you know what I've learned in these 6 weeks? Augustus asked, getting to his feet slowly. I've learned that true power does not come from the ability to exclude others, but from the ability to elevate them. That's progressive nonsense, Sebastian spat. Real power comes from competition, from superiority, from keeping the competition down. And how is that working out for you? Augustus asked. Are you happy? Do you feel fulfilled? Can you look at yourselves in the mirror and feel proud of who you are as people? The questions hung in the air like bombs waiting to explode. Augustus could see in his old friends' faces that he had touched on something uncomfortable, something they preferred not to examine. Happiness is a luxury, Ricardo answered defensively. We focus on real success. And what is real success? Augustus pressed. Numbers in a bank account, the ability to humiliate employees, living in a bubble where you never have to confront your own humanity. You're talking like an idiot, Fernando stood up abruptly, clearly frustrated. Augustus, we're going to give you a week to reconsider this phase. After that, you'll have to choose between keeping your place in this circle or continuing with this social justice nonsense. I don't need a week, Augustus replied immediately. I choose to continue being a decent person. If that means losing your approval, then so be it. The silence that followed was absolute. For 15 years, these men had been his closest social circle, his validators, his accomplices in mutual arrogance. Losing their approval would have been unthinkable 6 weeks before. Fine, Augustus, Fernando said finally, picking up his jacket. But when this kindness experiment fails, when you realize that the real world doesn't work with hugs and language classes, don't come back asking us to accept you. Back. I won't, Augustus promised, because I've discovered something that you apparently have never experienced. I've found a social circle based on mutual respect, personal growth, and genuine contribution to the well-being of others. And it turns out it's infinitely more satisfying than this one. As his old friends left the lounge with expressions of disgust, Augustus felt strangely relieved. For years he had maintained these friendships out of habit and social convenience, without realizing how toxic they had been for his development as a person. That same afternoon, Augustus attended his weekly session at the municipal library. As he practiced Chinese characters with Amanda, he told her about his confrontation with his old friends. Do you feel bad about losing those friendships? Amanda asked with genuine curiosity. Surprisingly, no, Augustus admitted. I feel like I've let go of a weight I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. It's normal, commented Ahmed, who had joined their study session. When we start to grow as people, sometimes we have to leave behind relationships that no longer serve us. But don't you feel lonely sometimes? Augustus asked. Yes, Mrs. Wang chimed in from the next table. But then we discover that there is a whole world of authentic people waiting to meet us. We just couldn't see them before because we were surrounded by mirrors that reflected our worst version. The words resonated deeply with Augustus. He realized that he had been surrounded by people who reflected and validated his worst qualities, while now he was surrounded by people who inspired him to be better. Besides, Amanda added with a smile, now you have real friends. Friends who value you for who you are trying to be, not for how much money you have. Augustus looked around the study table. Amanda with her impossible wisdom, Ahmed with his unshakable dignity, Mrs. Wang with her infinite patience, and he realized she was right. He had gained something much more valuable than what he had lost. You're right, he said finally. And do you know what the best part of all is? What? They asked in unison. For the first time in decades, when I look in the mirror, I like the person I see looking back. It was the simplest and most profound truth he had ever spoken in his entire life. The transformation was truly happening, cell by cell, thought by thought, action by action. And although he had lost the respect of his old social circle, he had gained something infinitely more precious, self-respect. That night, as he drove home, Augustus reflected on the extraordinary path he had taken. He had started as an arrogant tyrant, convinced of his superiority, and he was transforming into someone who finally understood that true greatness does not come from being above others, but from being beside them. The most important lesson had not come from business books or expensive consultants, but from a 12-year-old girl who had the courage to show a powerful man that he had been measuring success with the completely wrong metrics, that true wealth is not accumulated, it is shared, that true intelligence is not imposed, it is offered, and that true leadership does not dominate, but serves. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundations had been laid. And for the first time in his adult life, Augustus Smith felt he was on the right path. 1 year after the meeting that had changed everything, Augustus Smith found himself standing in the same place where his transformation had begun, the room on the 27th floor of his corporate tower. But it was no longer the same room, just as he was no longer the same man. The black marble walls had been replaced with large windows that filled the space with natural light. The expensive artworks had given way to photographs of the beneficiaries of his educational programs. And where there was once an intimidating marble desk, there was now a round wooden table where he met weekly with Rose, Amanda, and other community leaders to plan new initiatives. This morning was special. He had called a press conference to announce something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. The creation of the Amanda Foundation for Human Dignity, endowed with $500 million, almost half of his personal fortune, intended to expand educational programs across the country. Mr. Smith, Rose's professional voice took him out of his reflections as he reviewed the final documents of the foundation. The journalists have arrived. Representatives from the 20 universities that have committed to participating in the national program are also here. Rose had transformed as much as Augustus during these months. She no longer wore the navy blue cleaning uniform, but elegant professional suits that reflected her new position as executive director of the foundation. But more than her external appearance, what had changed was her posture. She no longer walked with the bowed head of someone who expects to be invisible, but with the confidence of someone who knows that her ideas are valued and respected. "And Amanda?" Augustus asked, although he knew she would never miss such an important event. "She's in the auditorium reviewing her presentation," Rose smiled. "She's been working on it for weeks. I think she's going to surprise everyone." As they walked to the auditorium, Augustus reflected on the extraordinary year that had passed. The changes had not only been in his personal life, but in the entire structure of his company and its impact on the community. Noguera Technologies had been recognized as the most innovative company in corporate social responsibility in the country. Employee turnover had decreased to almost zero. Productivity had increased by 45%. And most importantly, it had become the most desired employer in the country, not because of the high salaries, but because of the culture of respect and personal growth he had cultivated. "Mr. Smith," a familiar voice stopped him in the hallway. It was Mary, the first scholarship recipient who had graduated from the program, who now worked as an engineer at his company while finishing a master's degree in public administration. "Mary, what a joy to see you here." Augustus greeted her with genuine affection. "How are your studies going?" "Incredibly well, thanks to you," she replied. "But I wanted to tell you something before the conference." Mary paused, clearly emotional. "Yesterday, I received a letter from my younger sister. She's in her first year of high school, and she wrote to tell me that she wants to be like you when she grows up." Augustus felt a lump in his throat. "Like me?" "Yes. She says she wants to be someone who uses her success to help others succeed," Mary said. "She also says that you taught her that the truly rich are those who enrich others." The profound simplicity of those words, filtered through a teenager's perspective, hit Augustus more than any corporate recognition he had ever received. He realized that the true indicator of his transformation was not the newspaper articles or the awards, but the kind of example he was setting for the next generation. When they entered the auditorium, Augustus was breathless from what he saw. It was not only the presence of national and international journalists, nor the university representatives from all over the country. It was the quality of the audience. Hundreds of students from educational programs, Parents from working-class families, volunteer teachers from the libraries, employees from his company, refugees and immigrants who had found new opportunities, and community leaders who had emerged from the movement that had started with a simple lesson in humility. Dr. Ahmed, Augustus greeted the Syrian refugee, who now ran language programs in 18 libraries in the city. How does it feel to see all this? It feels like witnessing the birth of something that will change the world, Ahmed replied with tears in his eyes. A year ago, I was a taxi driver with broken dreams. Today, I am the coordinator of a program that has taught languages to more than 2,000 people. This is what a real second chance means, and you gave second chances to thousands of people, chimed in Mrs. Wang, who had developed a Mandarin curriculum that was now used in universities in 4 states, including her own. Augustus realized the profound truth in those words. His transformation had been essentially a second chance to be the person he had always had the potential to be, but who had been buried under decades of arrogance and emotional disconnection. Finally, the time for the official conference arrived. Augustus walked to the podium, but before he began, he did something that surprised everyone. He invited Amanda to join him on stage. Amanda, now 13, had grown not only physically, but in presence and moral authority. She wore an elegant navy blue dress, not expensive, but chosen with the same care that characterized everything she did. Her eyes had the same penetrating intelligence that had disconcerted Augustus a year earlier, but now they also had the confidence of someone who had seen her ideas turn into tangible reality. "Ladies and gentlemen," Augustus began, his voice clear but loaded with genuine emotion. "Exactly 1 year ago, I was in this same room, convinced that I was one of the most successful men in the country. I had 2.8 billion, the fear-based respect of my employees, and the envious admiration of my colleagues. I was also, without knowing it, one of the poorest and most miserable men in the country." The auditorium was in absolute silence, each word resonating with the authority of lived experience. Then, this extraordinary young woman entered my room and gave me the most important lesson of my life. Amanda taught me that I had been confusing financial success with human superiority, that I had been wasting opportunities to meet extraordinary people because of stupid prejudices, and that I had been using my privilege to separate instead of to connect, to humiliate instead of to elevate. Augustus looked at Amanda, who smiled at him with encouragement. "But Amanda not only humiliated me, although I certainly deserved it," he said. "She offered me something much more valuable. She offered me the opportunity for redemption. She taught me that it's never too late to change, that it's never too late to be better, and that real transformation requires not only recognizing your mistakes, but taking concrete actions to amend them." Over this past year, I have had the privilege of learning from an extraordinary community of educators, students, working-class families, refugees, and immigrants who have shown me what it really means to contribute to society. I have learned that education is the great equalizer, that talent is distributed uniformly, but opportunities are not, and that when we invest in human potential, the returns exceed any financial investment. Augustus paused, allowing the words to resonate in the packed auditorium. "Today, I announce the creation of the Amanda Foundation for Human Dignity, endowed with $500 million, destined to expand inclusive educational programs throughout the country. But more important than the money is the philosophy behind this foundation. The belief that every person, no matter where they were born or how much money their parents have, deserves the opportunity to fully develop their potential." The ovation that followed was immediate and sustained, but Augustus raised his hand to continue. "However, I don't want this conference to be about me or my money," he said. "I want it to be about the people who truly made this transformation possible. I want you to listen to Amanda, who at 13 years old understands more about leadership, human dignity, and social justice than most of the adults I know. Augustus stepped away from the microphone and gestured to Amanda, who approached with the same quiet confidence she had shown during their first meeting. "Thank you, Mr. Smith," Amanda began, her voice clear and firm, resonating throughout the auditorium. "A year ago, when I first entered your room, I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to defend my mother's dignity and show that a person's value is not determined by their job or their bank account. But what I've learned over this past year is that individual changes can create ripples that transform entire communities. When a person decides to see the humanity in others, when they decide to use their privilege to create opportunities instead of barriers, when they decide that real success is measured by how much we elevate others, that individual decision can change thousands of lives." Amanda looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with students, parents, and teachers. "The programs we are announcing today are not just about education, they are about dignity. They are about the fundamental belief that every child, every young person, every adult deserves the opportunity to reach their potential. They are about creating a society where your zip code does not determine your destiny, where your parents' work does not limit your dreams, where curiosity and effort are rewarded no matter your origin." When Amanda finished her presentation, the ovation was different from anything Augustus had ever heard before. It wasn't just applause. It was the sound of collective hope, of the recognition that real change was possible, of the understanding that they were witnessing the birth of something transformative. After the conference, as the crowd dispersed, Augustus found himself alone with Amanda and Rose in the transformed room. "How do you feel, Rose?" he asked, gesturing to the windows that now showed a city where hundreds of young people had new opportunities thanks to the programs they had created. "I feel like I've finally found what my life was made for," Augustus answered honestly. "Not to accumulate personal wealth, but to distribute opportunities. Not to demonstrate superiority, but to recognize and nurture greatness in others." "And don't you miss your old life?" Amanda asked with genuine curiosity. "You know what I miss about my old life?" "Nothing," Augustus answered. "Absolutely nothing. Because I realize now that that old life wasn't really living. It was simply existing in a bubble of privilege that separated me from everything that makes life worthwhile. Real human connections, transcendent purpose, the satisfaction of contributing to the well-being of others. Besides," he added with a smile, "it turns out that helping others is the most selfishly satisfying activity that exists. Every time I see a student graduate, every time I see a family break cycles of educational poverty, every time I see a refugee find new hope, I experience a joy that no financial transaction has ever given me." As the sun set over the city, the three stood in silence for a moment, reflecting on the extraordinary year they had shared and the years of impact that were to come. "Do you know what the most incredible thing about all this is?" Augustus finally broke the silence. "What?" Amanda and Rose asked in unison. "That this is just the beginning," he said. "The $500 million from the foundation will directly touch the lives of at least 50,000 students in the next 5 years. But those students will touch the lives of others who will touch the lives of others. The impact will multiply exponentially for decades." "It's like throwing a stone into a lake," Amanda observed. "The ripples keep spreading long after the stone has disappeared." "Exactly," Augustus replied. "And the original stone was a 12-year-old girl who had the courage to confront a powerful man with the truth. Amanda, you not only changed my life, you changed the course of thousands of lives you don't even know yet." As they left the room that night, Augustus knew he had found something that all his previous money could never have bought. A legacy that would last long beyond his own life. A contribution to the world that would be measured not in financial gains, but in opportunities created, in dreams realized, in cycles of injustice broken. The transformation was complete, but the impact was just beginning. And it had all started with a simple lesson on human dignity, taught by an extraordinary girl who had seen beyond appearances to recognize the potential for goodness that exists in every human heart. The end.